Our top headline at this hour: panic and grief in El Paso, Texas. At least 20 people are killed and dozens more injured in a shooting in a busy shopping area. Police have a suspect in custody. Hundreds are arrested at an opposition protest in Moscow. Demonstrators defy a protest ban for the second week in a row as they call for fair elections. And clouds of tear gas choke the streets of Hong Kong as the mass protest movement shows no signs of slowing down. Clashes between police and demonstrators turn violent yet again as main roads are blocked and a police station is vandalized. Hi, and thanks for joining us here at France 24. I'm Claire Rush. Our top headline takes us to El Paso, Texas, which is reeling from a deadly shooting in a busy shopping area. At this hour, local authorities confirm at least 20 people have been killed, while nearby hospitals have received some 24 victims. Police have identified the suspect as a 21-year-old male who they've taken into custody. According to media reports, police have blocked off the streets near a home associated with the suspect near the Dallas area, more than 1,000 kilometers away from El Paso. Officers say they're investigating the shooting as a possible hate crime. Earlier, Texas Governor Greg Abbott gave a press conference. Let's have a listen.
Texas grieves for the people of El Paso today. On a day that would have been a normal day for someone to leisurely go shopping, turned into one of the most deadly days in the history of Texas. Lives were taken who should still be with us today. 20 innocent people from El Paso have lost their lives, and more than 24 more are injured.
For more on this story, we crossed to Washington correspondent Philip Crowther. He says there's a risk the number of fatalities may increase.
It's another very heavy death toll after another mass shooting in the United States. A death toll that could go up further still, taking into account the large amount of injuries reported, including quite a few very serious ones. The police department of El Paso says that the only suspect has been taken into custody and he has been identified as a white male in his 20s. A motive has not been given by the police at this point, despite there seeming to be online postings from the suspect that could give us some idea as to what might have motivated him. The police goes on to say that the whole shooting took place in the parking lot and inside of a Walmart supermarket in which there were between 1,000 and 3,000 people at the time. Also, the police says that there was no altercation between the suspect and the police at the moment of his arrest.
The mass shooting in El Paso comes as the people of Baltimore, on the other side of the country, are taking part in a so-called ceasefire weekend. Since Friday, activists have been marching to remember the victims of gun violence in a state which has one of the highest murder rates in the U.S. The event caps a week in which President Trump sparked accusations of racism with his comments attacking Baltimore over its crime. Alexander Alcott has the story.
The activists began their march at the Park Avenue corner where 40-year-old LeVar Bailey was shot dead in November 2017. Since then, a so-called ceasefire weekend has been held every 3 months in Baltimore to call for an end to the violence. With more than 300 people killed every year, the city, just an hour's drive from Washington, has one of the highest murder rates anywhere in the United States.
We are walking to let everyone outside of our community know that gun violence is self-destructive. It should not be tolerated.
The march comes after a week-long series of attacks by President Donald Trump, in which he criticized the high crime rate in the black-majority city and called it a rat and rodent-infested mess. This as he took aim at his political foe, Elijah Cummings, whose district covers more than half of Baltimore. The Democrats suggested the president and other Americans should visit the city to see the truth for themselves.
Every time you come to Baltimore, every time you spend a few dollars in a hotel, that means somebody in this neighborhood is working. It gives them a job. It gives them hope.
The ceasefire weekend includes the installation of peace flags and posters, as well as ceremonies to honour the victims. The marchers say that while crime is particularly high in their city, it's really a national problem, pointing out that firearms killed nearly 40,000 people across the US in 2017.
To Russia now, where hundreds were arrested at an opposition protest in Moscow on Saturday. An arrest monitoring group says more than 800 people have been detained, while the Interior Ministry gives a figure of 600 arrests. It's the second weekend in a row that demonstrators have defied a protest ban as they call for fair elections. Sanam Chantier reports.
Security forces clad in protective riot gear forcibly removing protesters from the streets of the Russian capital. According to an independent monitoring group, hundreds of people have been arrested this Saturday during a second weekend of rallies, which the authorities have dubbed illegal. A growing movement has been calling for opposition candidates to be permitted to take part in the city council elections in September. Authorities say many contenders were prohibited from running because they had failed to collect a sufficient number of signatures in their support, a claim firmly denied by the opposition. Some of the chants heard on the streets of Moscow, however, suggested goals far broader than the vote. They include Russia without Putin.
The smell of a color revolution is already in the air.
Most people won't be able to tolerate this government anymore. They steal and force us into poverty.
Earlier in the day, officers lined the streets, warning people not to protest and threatening them with lengthy jail sentences. Yet many, including the woman driving the country's opposition protests, defiantly tried to make their way to Moscow's central Trubnaya Square. As seen in these images, however, Lyubov Sobol was violently dragged by officers into a black van and detained. Activists say the Russian constitution allows them to freely protest, but authorities claim they need to agree the timing and location, something that was not done ahead of Saturday's protests.
Now, protests have also rocked Hong Kong for the 9th consecutive weekend. Marches that began Saturday afternoon in the Mong Kok area turned into violent clashes with riot police that continued past midnight, according to local media. Officers fired tear gas as demonstrators built barricades and, at one point, targeted a local police station. Thomas Waterhouse reports.
It's a fire that sparked joy rather than panic. As night fell in Hong Kong's Kowloon neighbourhood on Saturday, flames licked the entrance to the local police headquarters before firemen quickly moved in to extinguish them. The city's emergency services might be able to stamp out the protesters' fires, but demonstrators are adamant that their pro-democracy movement won't be so easily smothered. Security forces have nevertheless fired several rounds of tear gas to disperse the crowds of thousands who gathered for the 9th Saturday in a row. These streets, which would normally be filled with weekend shoppers, were once again turned into a battleground on which protesters fought police. Dressed mainly in black, the throng ignored police warnings and marched on past the designated endpoint of their rally. Officers had earlier said that any march which had not been pre-approved would be cleared out as an illegal gathering. Earlier in the day, demonstrators gave the city a taste of what they have planned for Monday's day of strikes, as they temporarily occupied the Cross Harbour Tunnel, bringing traffic to a standstill. Before those planned walkouts, police are bracing themselves for 2 more anti-Beijing rallies, which are scheduled for this Sunday, when the hard hats and the umbrellas will be out again in force.
Now, here in France, the city of Nantes was also the scene of clashes on Saturday, as hundreds gathered to condemn police violence. The unrest was sparked by the fatal drowning of a young man following a police evacuation of a music event on the banks of the Loire River last month. Demonstrators say police are to blame for the death.
Anger on the streets of Nantes in western France. Public property destroyed and set on fire. Clashes with law enforcement officers. An anti-police brutality march took place in the name of Steve Maya Caniceau on Saturday. Participants couldn't hold back their resentments at police. For protesters, there's no doubt about it. The police's alleged use of force led to the drowning of the 24-year-old.
A police charge on kids who were just playing down by those buildings. Why? Because they were making noise until 4 a.m. It's unacceptable.
I have a daughter who's 24 and a son who's 26. They could have died the same way. I'm a mother, that's why I'm here. This child could have been my child.
Some yellow vest protesters and ultra-left black blocs joined the rally, including these people who attacked a storefront under the watchful eye of a local resident.
Do you think it's super smart what you're doing? Why aren't you taking it out on banks? What are you doing to small businesses?
Earlier Saturday, another calmer march took place where Steve's body was found. Hundreds came to express their grief and their anger.
They just went to a music day party. Even my son said to me, "Mom, that could have been me in the water." Plenty of young people don't know how to swim. They shouldn't die. The government needs to take responsibility for this and stop lying.
The peaceful march ended in front of this graffiti of the young man. It was here that he fell into the Loire River and died at the age of 24.
In other world news, thousands celebrated Gay Pride in Belfast on Saturday, and this year's march was especially important for the LGBTQ community in Northern Ireland, as a new law legalizing same-sex marriage could come into effect in the coming months. Yenna Lee has the details.
Celebration, tolerance and activism. Thousands took to the streets in Belfast for the annual Pride Parade. This year's theme, Rights Now.
There's still an element of protest in that, we're still fighting for rights here, and it has been incredibly frustrating because, some of our politicians here really don't represent, I think, the majority view in Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK where same-sex marriage doesn't exist. But because Belfast currently has no functioning government due to a political crisis, MPs in Westminster suggested bills on two key societal issues.
Getting abortion decrim and getting marriage equality in Northern Ireland, obviously it's not there yet, but hopefully soon, will be absolutely monumental for the LGBT community here. But there's still a long way to go. The trans healthcare system in Northern Ireland is in a crisis state.
Should the power vacuum continue past October 21st, London's new regulations will come into effect in Northern Ireland by 2020.
Absolutely, there'll be a big, huge party.
And Pride participants promise they'll be back on the streets.
And we wrap up this bulletin with the spectacular story of France's flying man. Frankie Zapata is hoping for a second wind when he attempts to cross the English Channel on Sunday on a hoverboard he designed. Sunday's flight comes just over a week after his previous bid failed. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Undeterred, Frankie Zapata is getting back on his flyboard. The French inventor is gearing up for his second attempt to cross the English Channel on a jet-powered hoverboard.
I've been working 16 hours a day. Just yesterday we were up until 2:30 in the morning. We didn't even eat.
Zapata made it halfway to England on his first attempt last week, before crashing into the sea while trying to land on a boat to refuel. This time, Zapata will again carry enough kerosene in his backpack to fuel the hoverboard for about 10 minutes of flight, but his team have built a bigger refueling station for him to land on. He's determined to succeed.
As long as we don't get across, we'll keep trying. That's for sure. Even if I go alone, even if my team is too tired, whatever happens, I will cross. That's for sure.
Prior to his channel crossing bid, Zapata stole the show at this year's Bastille Day parade in Paris. The flyboard allows him to zoom through the air at speeds of up to 190 kilometers an hour. He's been developing it for the past 3 years, after having had the idea for it when he was a jet ski champion.
I just think about what could be the sensation of surfing the cloud. Nothing can stop you. It's just like you become a bird.
The flyboard has also captured the attention of the French military, and last year the government gave Zapata 1.3 million euros to develop it.
Goodbye for now. More news up next.